The conference room was a hum of chatter, the air thick with the scent of coffee and sugary donuts, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead. Balloons bobbed in the corner, their gold and silver ribbons curling, and a banner read, "Happy Retirement, Evelyn," in bold letters. At 65, I'd spent 30 years teaching at this school, grading papers, cheering at games, shaping lives, and tonight was meant to celebrate that. I stood by the refreshment table, my hands smoothing my navy blazer, my gray hair pinned neatly, my blue eyes scanning the room for a familiar smile. But as colleagues clinked glasses and laughed, their voices loud with stories that weren't mine, I felt like a stranger at my own farewell, invisible in the flicker of their celebration. Principal Carter was by the podium, his tie loose, regaling a group with tales of budget battles, while younger teachers snapped selfies, their phones flashing. A table held cards and a scrapbook I'd made, photos of my students, my classroom, moments I'd cherished, but it sat untouched, the pages curling slightly in the air-conditioned chill. I'd given my heart to this place, staying late, mentoring, believing it mattered, but tonight, no one seemed to notice. I'd thought retirement would feel like a milestone, a moment to be seen, but it felt like an ending I hadn't chosen. I picked up a donut, its glaze sticky, and took a bite, the sweetness cloying against my tongue. I moved to a quieter corner, the carpet muffling my steps, my blazer stiff against my shoulders. My fingers brushed the silver bracelet on my wrist, a gift from my late husband, David, its charm engraved with forever. I thought of him, how he'd tease me about my late-night grading, his voice warm. "You're changing the world, Evie." He'd seen me, always, but without him, and now without this job, I'd become the teacher who stayed late, who cared too much, who faded into the background. "Great party, Evelyn," a voice called. It was Sarah, a young math teacher, passing by with a plate of fruit, her smile quick, her eyes already on her phone. "Thanks," I said, my voice thin, forcing a smile. "You must be thrilled to retire," she added, not waiting for my reply before joining a group by the balloons. I nodded to the empty air, my throat tight, the donut heavy in my hand. "Thrilled. Great, Evelyn. Always there, always steady, never truly seen." I slipped into the hallway, the noise fading behind the glass door, the air cooler, smelling of floor wax and faint chalk dust. I leaned against the wall, its paint smooth under my palms, and caught my reflection in a trophy case, lined face, blue eyes tired but sharp, a woman who'd given everything to a school that moved on without her. I thought of my mother, long gone, how she'd hug me after a hard day, saying, "You're enough, Evie, just you." I'd forgotten that, buried under years of lesson plans and parent meetings. I'd planned this party to feel valued, but it only showed me how small I'd become, not to them, but to myself. I stepped outside, the night air crisp, carrying the faint salt of an ocean I'd once loved. The parking lot was quiet, my car a soft silhouette under a streetlight. I thought of David, how we'd drive to the coast on weekends, his hand on mine, the waves crashing below. I'd loved the sea's vastness, its endless motion, but I'd stopped seeking it, too busy with work to feel alive. Here, with the party's hum distant, I felt a spark, small but sharp. I wasn't enough to them, not to Sarah, not to the school, but I could be enough for me. I'd read about Seacrest, a coastal town hours away, with sandy shores and quiet streets. It was a whim, a whisper, but it felt like a call to start again. I walked to my car, the gravel crunching under my flats, my blazer brushing my wrists. The party's lights glowed behind me, but they weren't mine anymore. I wasn't angry, not really, it was quieter, a realization that I'd been waiting for them to see me, to give me back the worth I'd poured into their lives. They hadn't, and maybe they wouldn't. I thought of David again, his voice clear. "Go live, Evie, you're meant to shine." I dimmed myself for too long, shrinking to fit their needs. Now, with the stars faint above and the bracelet cool against my wrist, I felt ready to try. I didn't know what Seacrest held, but I was done being the unseen teacher, the forgotten colleague. I was Evelyn, and I was ready to find her again. The living room was dim, lit only by a table lamp that cast a warm pool of light over the coffee table, where I sorted through a box of old lesson plans and cards from students, their corners curled from time. The air smelled of dusty paper and the faint lavender of a candle I'd lit to steady my nerves. At 65, I'd spent my life in this house, grading papers, raising my daughter, Laura, loving David, but last night's retirement party, its chatter bypassing me, my scrapbook ignored, had left me feeling like a ghost in my own story. My gray hair was loose, brushing my shoulders, and I wore a soft cardigan over pajamas, its sleeves frayed from restless hands. My blue eyes caught the lamp's glow, reflecting a woman ready to stop fading. I opened a card from David, his handwriting bold, written on our 20th anniversary. Evie, you're my forever light. My throat tightened, and I set it down, my fingers lingering on the paper, soft and yellowed. I'd been his light, Laura's, my students, thinking love and duty meant giving everything. But last night, standing alone by the donuts, I'd felt dim, like a bulb flickering out. I thought of my mother, her hands sewing quilts, her voice saying, "Keep some of you for you, Evie." I'd nodded, but I hadn't listened, too busy being the teacher who stayed late, the mother who fixed, the wife who held steady. I pulled a suitcase from under the bed, its wheels creaking, and packed slowly sweaters, jeans, a sketchbook I hadn't touched in years, each item a quiet vow to myself. The act felt reckless, like I was 20 again, sneaking off with David to watch the ocean at dawn, his laugh warm in my ears. But this was for me, not him, not Laura, not the school. I'd read about Seacrest, a coastal town hours away, with sandy beaches and quiet paths. It was a name, a whisper, but it felt like a call, promising space to find Evelyn, the woman I'd buried under years of giving. "You're up early," Laura's voice startled me, her silhouette in the doorway, her hair messy from sleep, her robe tied loose. She'd stopped by to check on me after the party, her concern a weight I both loved and resented. "Packing," I said, my voice firm, zipping the suitcase. "I need a change." She frowned, her eyes searching mine. "Mom, are you okay? This is sudden." I nodded, my smile small but sure. Her worry was kind, but it came too late, like a bandage on a wound already scarred. She hugged me, brief and hesitant, then left, promising to call, leaving me with the suitcase and my resolve. I sat at the kitchen table, the candles glow soft, and opened my sketchbook, its pages blank but inviting. I drew a single line, a wave, and wrote, "I'm choosing me." The words looked fragile, but they felt like a spark, like a match struck in the dark. I thought of David, how he'd call me his sea star for shining through storms. I'd forgotten how to shine for myself, caught up in being teacher, mother, widow. But Seacrest, with its promise of waves and open skies, felt like a place I could try. I walked to the window, the glass cool against my palm, the yard dark beyond. The stars were faint, dimmed by city lights, but they were there, steady as always. I remembered a night with David, years ago, when we'd stood by the ocean, his arm around me, saying, "You're stronger than you know, Evie." I'd laughed, thinking he was teasing, but now, with the suitcase packed and the party's echoes fading, I believed him. I wasn't running away, I was running toward something, a life where I could be more than the teacher who cared too much, who smiled through silence. I carried the suitcase to my car, the driveway's gravel crunching under my slippers, the night air cool with a hint of salt. The engine purred as I started it, a sound both familiar and thrilling. I thought of Laura, how she'd looked at me with worry, and my colleagues, lost in their selfies. I loved them, always would, but I couldn't keep dimming for them. I'd call, I'd visit, but first, I needed to find myself, to see if Evelyn was still there, under the years of giving. I drove into the dawn, the road stretching open, the headlights carving a path through the dark. The radio played softly, an old song David loved, and I hummed along, my voice rusty but mine. Seacrest was hours away, a dot on the map, but it felt like a beginning. I didn't know what I'd find, maybe nothing, maybe everything, but I was ready to look. The stars faded as the sky lightened, and I felt a spark, small but fierce, like I was waking up after a long, quiet sleep. The Seacrest shore stretched wide before me, its waves curling gently against the sand, their soft roar mingling with the cries of gulls overhead, and I stood at the water's edge, my boots sinking into the damp sand, the air sharp with salt and seaweed. At 65, I'd never ventured so far alone, and this coastal town, with its weathered boardwalk and clapboard cottages, felt like a vast, unfamiliar canvas, both thrilling and unsettling. My gray hair was tied back with a scarf, my cardigan loose over jeans, and my hands clutched a small duffel bag, my fingers stiff from the drive. I'd left after the retirement party where my years of teaching were overlooked, and now, in Seacrest, I was searching for Evelyn, the woman I'd dimmed under decades of duty. I found my rental, a tiny cottage with salt-faded shingles and a porch overlooking the sea, its railing rough with peeling paint. The key was under a mat, and the door groaned as I pushed it open, revealing a cozy room smelling of cedar and faint mildew. The furniture was worn, a sagging sofa, a table scratched from use, a bed with a patchwork quilt. I set my duffel down, the floorboards creaking, and ran my fingers along a windowsill, its wood cool and gritty with salt. This wasn't home, but it was a space to breathe, a place where I could be more than the teacher who graded papers and smiled through silence. I walked into town, the boardwalk creaking under my boots, the air alive with the hum of waves and the distant clang of a buoy. The main street had a bakery, a small market, and a pier lined with fishing boats, their nets drying in the sun, smelling of brine and tar. I paused at a market stall selling sketch pads, their covers embossed with wave patterns, and bought one, its paper crisp under my touch. I thought of David, how he loved the ocean, pulling me to the shore to sketch, his voice warm. "Capture it, Evie, make it yours." I'd stopped sketching after he died, too busy with Laura and work, but now, with the sea's rhythm in my ears, I wanted to try again. "New in town?" a voice asked. It was Maggie, a vendor in her 60s with curly white hair and a kind smile, her hands arranging jars of jam. She wore a faded apron, her earrings glinting like shells. "Just got here," I said, my voice rusty, tucking the sketch pad under my arm. "Looking for a fresh start." "Seacrest's good for that," she said, her eyes crinkling. "The sea's got a way of teaching you." I nodded, her words settling like a smooth stone in my pocket, and walked on, the market's bustle fading behind me. I found a cafe on the pier, its windows streaked with salt, and ordered coffee, its bitterness grounding me as I sat at a weathered table, the wood sticky under my fingers. The air smelled of fried clams and sea air, and I opened my sketch pad, drawing the pier's curve, the pencils scratch a soft comfort. The town moved around me, fishermen shouting, a dog scampering by, and I felt out of place, my scarf too neat, my hands too soft. But there was freedom in being unknown, no one expecting me to teach or fix or stay late. Back at the cottage, I sat on the porch, the sea's roar steady, the air cooling with the scent of salt and wet sand. The sky was turning purple, the stars sharp and bright, and I thought of Laura, how she'd looked at me with worry when I packed, and my colleagues, their eyes on their phones at the party. I'd left a note saying I'd call, but part of me wondered if they'd noticed I was gone. Here, though, with the waves' endless song, I didn't need their eyes to feel alive. I was starting to see myself, not as the teacher who gave, but as Evelyn who could still create. I opened my sketch pad again, the bracelet from David Cool against my wrist, its silver charm glinting. I drew the cottage, its shingles weathered but sturdy, and wrote, "I'm here." The words were small, but they felt like a seed, planted in this new soil. I thought of my mother, her voice saying, "Find your shore, Evie, even if it's far." I wasn't sure I belonged here yet, but I was willing to try. The sea stretched vast before me, its tide alive, and I felt a spark, small but real. I was afraid, but I was in Seacrest, and that was enough for now. The Seacrest beach glowed under a soft morning sun, its sand cool and smooth beneath my bare feet, the waves hissing gently as they kissed the shore, their salty mist tingling on my lips. At 65, I'd been in this coastal town for a week, and its rhythm, the tide's pulse, the gull's cries, was weaving itself into me, stirring a quiet joy I hadn't felt in years. My gray hair was tied back with a scarf, my cotton blouse loose under a cardigan, and my hands held a sketch pad, its wave-embossed cover already softening from use. I'd come to Seacrest after my retirement party left me unseen, and now, with the sea's endless song, I was finding small moments to claim as Evelyn, not just the teacher who gave everything. I walked along the shore, the sand gritty between my toes, and stopped where driftwood lay scattered, their shapes smoothed by the tide. I sat on a piece, its surface cool and slick, and opened my sketch pad, drawing the waves curl, the pencil's scratch blending with the ocean's hum. The act felt like breathing again, a way to see the world through my eyes, not Laura's needs or my students' demands. I thought of David, how we'd collect shells on beaches like this, his laugh warm as he'd say, "Find the ones that sing, Evie." I'd stopped listening for songs after he died, too busy grading papers, but here, with the waves' rhythm, I felt them again, faint but alive. I wandered into town, the boardwalk warm under my sandals, the air carrying the buttery scent of fresh pastries from a bakery. I stopped there, its windows fogged with steam, and ordered a cinnamon roll, its glaze sweet and warm on my tongue. The wooden counter was worn, grounding under my fingers, and I sketched the bakery sign, its letters faded but bold. The simplicity of it, the roll, the sketch, the sea's distant roar, felt like a gift, a way of saying I could choose joy for myself, not just serve it to others. I thought of my mother, her hands kneading bread, her voice saying, "Hold the sweet things, Evie, they're yours." I was holding them now, small but bright, like shells on the shore. "You're settling in," a voice said. It was Maggie, the market vendor, her curly white hair catching the light, her apron dusted with flour. She sat across from me, holding a coffee, her smile warm. "Trying to," I said, showing her my sketch, my voice lighter than I meant. "This place, it's waking me up." "The sea does that," she said, her eyes crinkling. "It knows how to listen." Her words wrapped around me, soft but steady, like a tide pulling me gently forward, and I nodded, grateful for her kindness. I spent the afternoon exploring, the town revealing itself in quiet treasures, a child's kite soaring above the pier, the scent of lavender from a shop's open door, the waves' steady pulse. I stopped by a cliff path, its edge lined with wildflowers, their petals swaying in the breeze. I leaned against a railing, the metal cool under my palms, and watched the sea churn below, its foam white and wild. I thought of Laura, her worried frown when I packed, and my colleagues, their eyes on their phones at the party. I'd left without much explanation, just a note, and part of me wondered if they'd call. But here, with the sea moving free and fierce, I didn't need their eyes to feel real. I was starting to see Evelyn, the woman who sketched, who tasted cinnamon rolls, who walked alone and felt alive. Back at the cottage, I sat on the porch, the sea's roar softer now, the air cooling with the scent of salt and damp wood. I opened my sketch pad and drew the cliff path, its wildflowers delicate but stubborn, like the woman I was becoming. I wrote about the cinnamon roll, the sea, Maggie's words, each word a step toward claiming this place. I thought of David again, how he loved my quiet moments, calling them my sea star glow. I'd thought my glow was in giving, but now I saw it could be this, choosing to notice, to create, to keep something for myself. The stars came out, sharp against the dark, and I stayed on the porch, the quilt from the cottage around my shoulders. Seacrest wasn't home yet, but it was a place where I could grow, where I could find joy in small things, a sketch, a pastry, a kind word. I wasn't whole, but I was closer, and that was enough for now. The sea sang its endless song, its tide steady, and I smiled, my pencil still in hand, ready for whatever came next. The Seacrest Pier stretched out over the sea, its weathered planks creaking under my sandals, the air thick with the briny tang of salt water and the faint sweetness of blooming dune grass. At 65, I'd been in this coastal town for 2 weeks, and its rhythm, the waves' steady crash, the gulls' sharp cries, was starting to feel like a pulse I could lean into. My gray hair was tied back with a scarf, my cotton blouse soft under a cardigan, and my hands held my sketch pad, its pages now dotted with waves and cliffs. I'd come to Seacrest after my retirement party left me invisible, and now, with the sea's endless song, I was finding not just joy but connection, a sense of belonging I hadn't expected. I walked to the bakery on the main street, its windows warm with morning light, the air inside rich with the scent of fresh bread and cinnamon. Maggie was there, her curly white hair tucked under a cap, her hands kneading dough behind the counter. She'd become a familiar face, her jam stall a daily stop, and her easy warmth was pulling me out of my shell. I ordered a croissant, its buttery flakes crumbling on my tongue, and sat at a table, sketching the bakery's counter, its jars glinting like treasures. The act was becoming a ritual, a way to claim this place as mine, not as the teacher who served but as Evelyn, who could belong. I wandered to the pier later, where fishing boats bobbed, their nets drying in the sun. There I met Tom, a fisherman in his 70s with a weathered face and a quiet laugh, his hands rough from years at sea. He was mending a net, his fingers deft, and I paused, drawn to his calm focus. I opened my sketch pad, drawing his hands, the net's knots intricate under my pencil. I thought of David, how he loved watching fishermen, saying, "They know the sea's secrets, Evie." I'd stopped seeking secrets after he died, too busy with Laura's life and my students, but now, with Tom's steady work and the sea's hum, I felt them stirring again. "Got a knack for that," Tom said, glancing at my sketch, his voice low, his eyes kind under a worn cap. "Just trying," I said, my voice shy but warm, showing him the drawing. "It's new for me." "New's good," he said, his smile crinkling his face. "Keeps the heart young." His words landed softly, like a pebble in calm water, and I smiled, feeling seen in a way I hadn't at the retirement party. Maggie joined us later, her apron swapped for a shawl, and we sat on a bench. The piers would warm under us, the air carrying the scent of fish and salt. They shared stories, her bakery start, his years on the water, and I listened, my sketch pad open, feeling a spark of belonging. I told them about the party, how my scrapbook sat untouched, my voice steady but tinged with old hurt. They nodded, their eyes gentle, not pitying but understanding, and I felt a weight lift, like I wasn't just the woman who'd taught, but someone who could be known. I walked back to the cottage, the sun high, the air warm with the scent of sea and grass. The town was alive, kids laughing, boats creaking, and I felt part of it, not just a visitor. I thought of Laura, how she'd called yesterday, her voice cautious, asking if I was okay. I'd said yes, but I hadn't told her how Seacrest was waking me, how Maggie's laugh and Tom's quiet wisdom were showing me I could be more than the mother, the teacher, the widow. I'd spent years giving my light to others, thinking it was enough, but here, with new faces, I was learning to shine for myself. Back at the cottage, I sat on the porch, the sea's roar softer now, the air cooling with the scent of salt and pine. I opened my sketch pad and drew Tom's net, its lines strong yet delicate, like the connections I was forming. I wrote about Maggie's warmth, Tom's words, the way the sea felt like a friend. I thought of my mother, her voice saying, "Find your people, Evie, they'll hold you up." I was finding them now in Seacrest's small moments, in the kindness of strangers who saw me, not for what I did, but for who I was. The stars came out, bright against the dark, and I stayed on the porch, the quilt around my shoulders. Seacrest was becoming a home, not just a place, and these people, Maggie, Tom, were its heartbeat. I wasn't whole yet, but I was closer, my heart younger, as Tom said. The sea sang its steady song, and I smiled, my pencil still in hand, ready for whatever came next. The Seacrest cottage was quiet that evening, the air heavy with the scent of sea salt and the faint must of old books I'd found on a shelf, their pages yellowed and soft. A storm was brewing outside, waves crashing louder against the shore, and I sat at the kitchen table, a single lamp casting a warm glow over a letter I'd found in a box of David's things, its envelope creased, addressed to me in his familiar scrawl. At 65, I'd been in this coastal town for 3 weeks, finding joy in sketches and new friends like Maggie and Tom, but this letter, unopened since his death, stirred a pain I thought I'd buried. My gray hair was loose, my cardigan soft over a cotton dress, and my hands trembled slightly, the silver bracelet from David cool against my wrist. I opened the letter, the paper crinkling, and read his words, "Evie, you're my sea star, shining even when you don't see it." He'd written it in his final weeks, when illness had stolen his strength, and my throat tightened as I traced his handwriting, each loop a memory of his love. I'd been as light, Laura's, my students, but giving so much had left me hollow, a shell polished by duty but empty inside. The retirement party had shown me that, with its untouched scrapbook and distracted glances, and though Seacrest was waking me, this letter brought back the weight of all I'd carried. I thought of my mother, her hands folding laundry, her voice saying, "Don't lose yourself, Evie, even for love." I'd nodded, but I'd lost myself anyway, serving others until I faded. I stood, the chair scraping the floor, and walked to the window, the glass cold and streaked with rain. The sea churned beyond, its foam wild under the darkening sky, and I felt the storm inside me too, a mix of grief and longing. David had seen me, always, but without him, I'd poured myself into Laura's life, my classroom, thinking it was enough. The letter reminded me of the woman I'd been, vibrant, sketching by the sea, laughing with him, but also of the years I'd spent as the teacher who stayed late, the mother who fixed, the widow who grieved alone. Seacrest was helping me find Evelyn again, but this letter was a wave, pulling me back to the pain of loss. "You holding up in this weather?" a voice called. It was Tom, the fisherman, standing on my porch, his raincoat dripping, his weathered face kind under a soaked cap. He'd stopped by to check on me, his presence steady. "It's stirring things up," I said, holding the letter, my voice thin against the wind's howl. "Found something for my husband." He nodded, his eyes gentle. "The sea brings up old things. Let it." His words were simple, like a lighthouse in the storm, and I smiled faintly as he left, promising coffee tomorrow. I sat again, the lamp's light soft, and reread David's letter, each word a bittersweet tide. I thought of the retirement party, how I'd felt invisible, and Laura's worried call, her voice distant. I'd given them everything, thinking it was love, but the letter showed me I'd given myself away too. Seacrest, Maggie's warmth, Tom's quiet wisdom, my sketches, was teaching me I could be more than duty. I wasn't erasing David or Laura, but I was learning to carry them differently, to make room for Evelyn, the woman who could still shine. I opened my sketch pad, the storm's roar softening outside, and drew the sea as it looked now wild and gray, its waves jagged under my pencil. The act felt like a bridge, connecting my past to this moment, grief to hope. I wrote about the letter, Tom's words, the way the sea felt like a mirror for my heart. I thought of David again, how he'd loved my sketches, calling them my sea star magic. I'd thought my magic was in giving, but now I saw it could be in creating, in staying present for myself. The rain slowed, the air cooler now, carrying the scent of wet sand and pine. I stepped onto the porch, the quilt around my shoulders, the sea's rhythm steady despite the storm. Seacrest wasn't a cure, but it was a place where I could face my ghosts and still find light, Maggie's laugh, Tom's kindness, my own hands sketching. I wasn't free of the past, but I was stronger, ready to keep going, to find the woman I was meant to be. The Seacrest cliffs stood firm against the morning tide, their rugged edges softened by patches of wildflowers, and I sat on a weathered bench overlooking the sea, the air crisp with salt and the faint earthiness of damp grass. At 65, I'd been in this coastal town for a month, finding light in Maggie's warmth, Tom's wisdom, and my sketches, but David's letter from last night lingered, urging me to look deeper, to find Evelyn beyond the roles I'd played. My gray hair was tied back with a scarf, my cardigan loose over a cotton blouse, and my hands held my sketch pad, its pages filled with waves and nets, each a step toward reclaiming myself. The retirement party had shown me I'd faded, and now, with the sea's steady pulse, I was peeling back the layers of sacrifice to see who remained. I sketched the cliffs, their lines jagged yet enduring, the pencil's scratch blending with the wave's distant crash. The act was a mirror, showing me a woman who'd given everything, teacher, mother, wife, thinking it was love, but losing herself in the giving. David's words, "You're my sea star, shining even when you don't see it," echoed in my mind, a reminder of the Evelyn he'd loved, vibrant and free. I'd buried her under lesson plans, Laura's needs, and grief, becoming the steady one who never asked for more. I thought of my mother, her hands shelling peas, her voice saying, "You're more than what you do, Evie." I'd nodded, but I'd measured my worth by others' needs, and Seacrest was teaching me that wasn't enough. I walked into town, the boardwalk warm under my sandals, the air carrying the smoky scent of a fish grill from a nearby stall. The market was busy, its stalls bright with jams and shells, and I stopped by Maggie's, her curly white hair glinting as she arranged her jars. She'd become a friend, her bakery a haven, and I felt a quiet strength in these new roots. I bought a jar of blueberry jam, its glass cool in my hands, and thought of the retirement party, how my scrapbook sat untouched, my years of teaching reduced to a quick, "Great party, Evelyn." I'd been invisible there, but here, with Maggie's smile and Tom's nod from his boat, I was starting to shine again, not for them, but for me. "You look thoughtful today," Maggie said, handing me a small scone, her eyes kind but sharp. "Digging deep," I said, my voice soft, taking the scone, its warmth grounding. "Trying to find me." "The sea's good for that," she said, her smile warm. "It shows you what's true." Her words settled like a soft wave, and I nodded, carrying the scone and jam back to my cottage. I sat on the porch, the sea's roar steady, the air cooling with the scent of salt and pine. I opened my sketch pad and drew the bench on the cliffs, its wood worn but strong, like the woman I was uncovering. I wrote about David's letter, Maggie's words, the way the sea felt like a guide, leading me to question who I'd been. I'd spent decades being the anchor, teaching late, raising Laura alone, grieving David quietly, thinking it was strength. But strength wasn't just giving, it was claiming myself too. Seacrest, with its tides and kind faces, was showing me I could be Evelyn, not just the roles I'd worn. I thought of Laura, how our calls were brief, her voice polite but distant, and the party, where colleagues ignored my scrapbook. I'd poured my light into them, thinking it would reflect back, but it hadn't. David's letter was a mirror, showing me the woman I'd been, vibrant, sketching, laughing, and the one I'd become, dimmed by duty. I wasn't angry, not anymore. It was quieter, a resolve to find the Evelyn who could shine without needing others' eyes. Maggie's scone, Tom's net, my sketches, they were threads, weaving a new life, one I chose. I walked to the beach, the sand cool under my feet, the waves curling gently now, their foam soft and white. I thought of my mother again, how she'd sit by the sea, saying, "Your heart's big, Evie, but save some for you." I was saving it now, in these moments, sketching cliffs, tasting jam, talking with friends. Seacrest wasn't a cure, but it was a place to grow, to ask who I was when I wasn't giving. I wasn't whole yet, but I was closer, each sketch a step, each wave a whisper of truth. The stars began to show, sharp against the twilight, and I stayed on the porch, the quilt around my shoulders. I opened my sketch pad again, the bracelet from David glinting, and wrote, "I'm finding her." The words felt like a promise, small but fierce. The sea sang its endless song, and I smiled, ready to keep digging, to claim the woman I was meant to be. The Seacrest Community Center smelled of clay and glaze, its air cool and earthy, with sunlight streaming through high windows, casting dappled patterns on the wooden floor. At 65, I'd been in this coastal town for 5 weeks, finding myself in Maggie's kindness, Tom's wisdom, and my sketches, but David's letter had pushed me to seek more, to claim my voice in a new way. My gray hair was tied back with a scarf, my cotton blouse dusted with clay under a cardigan, and my hands worked a lump of clay on a pottery wheel, its slick texture grounding me. The retirement party had shown me I'd faded, and now, joining this pottery class, I was crafting not just clay but courage, shaping Evelyn into someone who could speak. The wheel hummed under my hands, the clay yielding as I shaped a simple bowl, its curves uneven but honest. The act felt like my sketches, a way to create something tangible, to say I was here, not just the teacher who gave or the mother who fixed. David's words, "You're my sea star, shining even when you don't see it," echoed in my mind, reminding me of the woman who'd laughed and dreamed. I'd lost her to years of duty, lesson plans, Laura's needs, silent grief. But here, with the clay's cool weight, I was molding her back. I thought of my mother, her hands stitching quilts, her voice saying, "Make something yours, Evie." This bowl, imperfect but mine, was a start. The class was small, a mix of locals and newcomers, their chatter soft over the wheel's hum. Maggie had told me about it, her eyes bright, and I'd signed up, nervous but eager. I looked around, seeing hands shaping vases, mugs, lives, and felt a spark of belonging, not just to Seacrest, but to myself. I thought of the retirement party, how my scrapbook sat untouched, my years reduced to a quick, great party. I'd been invisible there, but here, with clay under my nails and the sea's distant roar, I was visible, not to others, but to me. "Coming along nicely," said Clara, the instructor, a woman in her 60s with short silver hair and a warm smile, her apron streaked with glaze. She leaned over my wheel, her hands steady. "It's a mess," I said, half laughing, my voice lighter than I expected, wiping clay from my fingers. "It's a beginning," she said, her eyes kind. "That's where the beauty starts." Her words settled like a soft tide, and I nodded, my hands returning to the clay, feeling stronger. After class, I walked to the beach, the sand warm under my sandals, the air carrying the scent of salt and seaweed. The waves curled gently, their foam white and soft, and I carried my bowl, still wet, wrapped in cloth. I sat on a driftwood log, its surface smooth, and sketched the sea, the pencil's scratch blending with the tide's rhythm. I thought of Laura, our calls still brief, her voice cautious, and the party, where colleagues missed my light. I'd spent decades giving, teaching, raising, grieving, thinking it was enough, but this pottery class, like my sketches, was teaching me I could create for myself, could speak through clay and lines. Back at the cottage, I set the bowl on the porch table, the sea's roar steady, the air cooling with the scent of salt and pine. I opened my sketch pad and drew the bowl, its curves wobbly but proud, like the woman I was becoming. I wrote about Clara's words, the clay's feel, the way the sea felt like a partner in my rediscovery. I thought of David again, how he loved my creations, calling them my sea star magic. I'd thought my magic was in giving, but now I saw it in making, in claiming my voice through each bowl, each sketch. The stars came out, sharp against the night, and I stayed on the porch, the quilt around my shoulders. Seacrest was more than a place now, it was a canvas, with Maggie's warmth, Tom's wisdom, and this class weaving me into it. I wasn't just the woman who'd taught or mourned. I was Evelyn, shaping her courage, speaking through clay. I wasn't whole yet, but I was closer, each creation a step toward the woman I was meant to be. The Seacrest Cafe was warm with the scent of fresh coffee and fried clams, its windows fogged against the cool evening air, and I sat at a corner table, my hands nervous around a mug, the steam rising in soft curls. At 65, I'd been in this coastal town for 6 weeks, shaping myself through pottery, sketches, and friends like Maggie and Tom. But today, Laura was coming to visit, our first meeting since I left after the retirement party. My gray hair was tied back with a scarf, my cardigan soft over a cotton dress, and my silver bracelet from David glinted under the cafe's soft lights. The party had shown me I'd faded, and Seacrest had helped me shine, but facing Laura meant bridging a past strained by my giving and her distance. I sipped my coffee, its bitterness grounding me, and looked out the window, where the sea churned under a gray sky, its waves steady but restless. Laura and I had drifted since David's death, me pouring myself into teaching and her life, her pulling away, building a world I wasn't part of. Our calls were polite, her worry for my move to Seacrest tinged with confusion. I thought of David's letter, his words calling me a sea star, and how I'd lost that light, giving too much, expecting love to flow back. Seacrest, Maggie's warmth, Tom's wisdom, my clay bowls had shown me I could shine for myself. But I wanted to mend things with Laura, not erase her, just hold her differently. The cafe door jingled, and Laura stepped in, her dark hair tied back, her coat damp from the drizzle, her eyes scanning until they found me. She was 40, her face softer than I remembered, but her smile was cautious, like she wasn't sure who I'd become. I stood, my heart quick, and we hugged, her coat cool against my arms. We sat, the table small between us, and I felt the weight of years, her teenage rebellion, my late nights grading, our grief for David, unspoken but heavy. "You look different," Laura said, her voice careful, stirring her tea, her eyes on the mug. "Seacrest's changing me," I said, my voice steady but soft, tracing the bracelet. I needed to find myself. She nodded, her frown faint. "I wish you'd told me you felt so, lost." Her words stung, but they were honest, and I leaned forward, ready to meet her halfway. We talked, slowly at first, the cafe's hum a gentle backdrop. I told her about the party, how my scrapbook was ignored, how I'd felt invisible, my voice calm but raw. She listened, her eyes wide, and shared her own hurt, how my giving felt like pressure, how she'd pulled away to breathe. I thought of my mother, her hands knitting, her voice saying, "Love lets go, Evie," when it needs to. I'd held Laura too tightly, thinking it was love, but here, with the sea's rhythm outside, I saw we could rebuild, not as mother and child, but as women, equal and honest. I showed her my sketch pad, its pages filled with waves, nets, and bowls, each a piece of the Evelyn I was finding. She traced a drawing of the pier, her smile small but real, and told me about her job, her life, her own quiet dreams. We laughed, a soft sound, when I mentioned Maggie's scones, and cried when we spoke of David, his absence a shared ache. The cafe grew quieter, the air cooler now, carrying the scent of rain and salt, and I felt a bridge forming, fragile but strong, like the clay I'd shaped. We walked to the beach, the sand damp under our shoes, the waves softer now, their foam glowing in the dusk. I thought of the retirement party, how I'd waited for others to see me, and Laura's calls, her voice distant. I'd given too much, expecting her to fill the space David left, but Seacrest had taught me I could fill it myself, through sketches, clay, friends. Laura wasn't my light, but she was my daughter, and I loved her enough to let her be, to meet her as Evelyn, not just Mom. Back at the cottage, we sat on the porch, the sea's roar steady, the air rich with salt and pine. I gave her a small clay bowl, its glaze uneven but warm, and she held it, her eyes soft. I thought of David again, how he loved our talks by the sea, calling them our sea star moments. I was making new moments now with Laura, with myself. Seacrest wasn't a cure, but it was a place to mend, to build bridges, to shine. The Seacrest shore glowed under a late afternoon sun, its waves curling gently against the sand, their soft hiss blending with the distant laughter of children flying kites along the pier. At 65, I'd been in this coastal town for 2 months, weaving a new life through pottery, sketches, and friends like Maggie and Tom, and yesterday's talk with Laura had mended something, leaving me lighter, whole in a way I hadn't expected. My gray hair was loose, catching the breeze, my cotton dress soft under a cardigan, and my hands held a small clay bowl, its glaze shimmering with blues like the sea. The retirement party had shown me I'd faded, but Seacrest had helped me claim my tide, shining as Evelyn, a woman who chose herself. I walked along the beach, the sand cool beneath my bare feet, the air sharp with salt and the faint sweetness of dune grass. I stopped by a tide pool, its water clear, reflecting tiny crabs and starfish, and knelt, the bowl heavy in my hands. I thought of David's letter, calling me his sea star, and how I'd lost that light, giving too much to Laura, my students, my school. Seacrest had given it back, through Maggie's scones, Tom's quiet wisdom, Clara's pottery class, and Laura's honest words. I'd come here searching, unsure, but now I stood steady, my roots deep in this sandy soil. I set the bowl in the tide pool, its glaze catching the light, a gift to the sea that had guided me. The act felt like a promise, a way to say I was here, not just surviving but thriving. I thought of my mother, her hands tending roses, her voice saying, "Bloom where you're planted, Evie." I'd bloomed here in Seacrest's small moments, sketching waves, shaping clay, laughing with friends. The retirement party, with its untouched scrapbook, felt distant now, a memory that no longer stung. I'd been invisible there, but here I was seen, not just by others, but by myself. "You're glowing today," Maggie said, joining me, her curly white hair bright, her shawl fluttering in the breeze. She'd walked over from her bakery, her smile warm. Feeling it, I said, my voice steady, standing to hug her. "This place, it's home." "The sea knew you belonged," she said, her eyes crinkling. "We all did." Her words wrapped around me like a warm tide, and I smiled, my heart full. I walked to the pier, the boards creaking under my sandals, the air alive with the scent of fried clams and sea spray. Tom was there, mending a net, his hands deft, and he waved, his quiet nod a steady anchor. I opened my sketch pad, drawing the pier's curve, the kites soaring above, each line a thread in the life I'd built. I thought of Laura, how we'd cried and laughed, rebuilding our bond as women, not just mother and daughter. She'd left this morning, promising to visit again, and I'd felt peace, knowing I loved her without needing her to complete me. Back at the cottage, I sat on the porch, the sea's roar soft now, the air cooling with the scent of salt and pine. I opened my sketch pad and drew the tide pool, its starfish vivid, like the Evelyn I'd found. I wrote about Maggie's words, Tom's nod, the bowl I'd left, each word a stone in my foundation. Seacrest wasn't a cure, but a canvas where I'd painted a life, clay bowls, sketches, friendships, a mended bond with Laura. I thought of David, how he called my moments by the sea my sea star magic. That magic was mine now, not in giving but in living, in choosing myself. The stars came out, bright against the dark, and I stayed on the porch, the quilt around my shoulders. I looked at the sea, its tide endless, and felt whole, not perfect but enough. To anyone listening, I'd say this: believe you're enough. Start over no matter your age. Share your story. Seacrest taught me it's never too late to choose yourself, to find your tide and shine. I was Evelyn, and I was home.